Hi guys, I hope you can hear me okay for lesson 5. Let's go ahead and get started with our first lesson on JavaScript. So in this lesson, we're going to learn about JavaScript and using variables in JavaScript. We'll learn how to add JavaScript code to your HTML web page, how to call a JavaScript function when you click on the Submit button. We'll learn how to pop up an alert message box and use basic variables to do math. So it's your very first introduction to the real coding of the web. JavaScript code can be embedded into your web page, and it makes it dynamic and interactive. So some cool things that it can do are it can analyze input that's entered into a form, anything from radio buttons and checkboxes to numeric inputs and text input. It can recognize mouse events or even touchscreen gestures, so it can recognize when your mouse is hovering over, clicking on, or dragging elements on your web page. And it can also register touchscreen gestures from if you're on a mobile or a tablet. It can interact with you, it can display or store information, and one of the best features about JavaScript, and the reason why it's so popular, is it can actually change the content of the web page while you're viewing it. So many of the web pages that you view on the internet are not actually pre-written, they're dynamically created on the spot right when you load up the page. So it's a cool feature of JavaScript. We're not going to change the content of our web page today. We're just going to learn how to pop up message boxes, but that will be in a future lesson. So the most important tag for JavaScript is the script tag. You use this to embed a JavaScript code into your HTML web page. There's a begin script tag and an end script tag. You can put it in the head or in the body. It's actually pretty common if the interactive elements of your web page are in the body. Many times you'll see the script in the body of the web page. If you're linking an external script to your web page, it's not uncommon to find this tag in the head. It works either way. So an external script is linked by using the script tag with the source attribute to show the file name of your JavaScript file, or you can just write the code right in your web page as it is by doing begin script, writing all your code, and then end script. This is what JavaScript code looks like. So when you add the script into your web page, you just do the begin script and end script tags, and then this is your most basic function is the alert function. So if for alert, you'll notice there's parentheses, and then there's a string in double quotes inside those parentheses, and every statement in JavaScript ends with a semicolon. Since this line of code is just sitting kind of by itself in between the script and end script tags, this is going to run right away when your page loads. So let's demonstrate what that looks like in Visual Studio. So you can see in Visual Studio, I've got a pretty basic web page. It just has 2 inputs, one where I can type in how many fidget spinners I want, and it's a numeric input, and another where I can input how much each fidget spinner costs, which is also a numeric input. I'm not going to start by doing the math on these. I've just started by, before the end body tag, I've put my begin script and end script tags, and then the alert hello world. You'll see that when I run this, and hopefully this shows up in the frame of the screen recorder, it pops up a little message box that you can see right there that says hello world. So that's the JavaScript code running and popping up that message box. It runs right away as soon as the page loads. Okay? Let's go ahead and close this and go on to the next fancy thing that we can do in JavaScript. So, next slide is on JavaScript functions. So this is what a function looks like. Now, if I put this code into my web page, the alert box will no longer pop up. That's because what I'm doing with this code is I'm no longer telling the JavaScript page to pop up the message box right when the page loads. I'm declaring a function. This function is named AnalyzeForm, and there are 2 parentheses here, one open and one closed, and there's nothing inside them. That means there's no inputs into this function. It runs standalone. We'll learn more about parameters later. For right now, it's okay to just give it any name and then put a parentheses right here. An important thing about function names is you can use any combination of letters and numbers to name your function, but make sure you start with a letter. Inside the function, you'll see that it's enclosed with these called curly braces. These are the little like sideways mustaches that are like right above the enter key, so you'd hit shift square bracket to get those curly braces. and then all of your code for the function goes in between these curly braces. This JavaScript code no longer runs right away. It's going to run when you call the AnalyzeForm function. So it's just setting aside a chunk of code called the function that you can call over and over again whenever you want to, that will pop up this alert box and say hello world. So when do you call the function? How do you do it? Well, one of the common ways that you'll call a function is to set up an event handler and cause this function to run, for example, when you click a button or interact with your form. So if you go back to your HTML tag that has your push button, this is the input HTML tag for your button, and then there's a new attribute that you'll add called onClick. OnClick indicates that when you have a mouse click event on that button, it's going to call the JavaScript function called AnalyzeForm. You do need to have the open and close parentheses. If the function takes no parameters and it has an open and close parentheses, the function call also has to have no parameters, just plain open and close parentheses. Make sure that that's enclosed in double quotes, and now you've added an event handler to your HTML web page. So I'll show what that looks like. If I go back to Visual Studio, instead of having this say alert hello world, I'm going to embed this inside a function. So I'll say function AnalyzeForm, and then I need to have curly braces. It auto-added the end curly brace, so I'm just going to remove it and put it after the hello world alert. Hello world has to be enclosed inside those curly braces in order for it to run with the function. Next, I go up to where my button tag is in my HTML. The input type is button, the value is submit, and I'm going to add one more attribute here, onClick equals, and there are double quotes there, AnalyzeForm. I have to have the capitalization and spelling exact, and end the double quotes. So now when I click the button, it's going to find in JavaScript where the code is that's called AnalyzeForm and run all of the lines of code that are in between those curly braces. So I'll run it again, and you'll notice the message box doesn't pop up right away. But if I click the Submit button, let me shrink this a little bit so you can see it clearly. There we go. If I click the Submit button, there's the message box. So it called the function when I clicked the Submit button. Okay, so far so good. The last part of this lesson is how to get those numbers from in those numeric inputs and do the math on them. So let's go back to the presentation and keep going forward. We're going to need to set aside some variables. Computers are very good at storing and moving and doing math on information. So a variable is a place to store information, and this equals sign, that little equals operator, takes whatever is on the right side of the equal sign, and it stores that value inside the variable on the left side of the equal sign. So I've got four lines of code here that declare variables and set them to a value. In JavaScript code, you can name a variable anything you want. You're not just limited to naming it X or Y like you would do in math class. If this is a spinner element, name it spinner element, spell it out. A couple of rules with variable names, just like with function names. No spaces. You can use letters, numbers, and underscores, but no other fancy symbols. Letters, numbers, and underscores. It helps if the first character is a letter. I believe you can have the first character be an underscore, but that's not a super common way to name your variables. I recommend you start them with a letter. So this first variable is called spinner element, and we're setting it to the value of all of this. So this is how you get the form element that has the ID spinners. You'll notice in my HTML, I've got this input that has the ID attribute spinners. So this is the little numeric input field, and this is its ID. This has to match exactly that, that string in quotes in the code. So if I go back to the presentation here, where I say document.getElementById spinners, this text has to match the ID of that element, and that gets you the form element. Next, we have to get the number that's inside that element. So we say var spinners, different text, so it's a totally different variable, this is spinner element.value. So it gets the information stored in spinner element, and it calls an attribute of that variable, which is value. This is going to be the numeric input that goes into spinners. Variables are different types. This one has a type of form element, and this one has a type of number. You can't do math on form elements, and you can't change like form attributes of numbers. So different data types can do different things. It'll get clearer the more you work with it. So then we've got two more variables, and it does the same thing, but this time we get the form element with the ID of cost. That's the other numeric input. And then in this last variable, we get the value that's stored in that form element, cost. So in this next iteration of the code, we're going to pop up an alert that just repeats that information to you. You wanted blank spinners that cost blank each. Now normally when we pop up an alert box, we put a message in text in quotes, double quotes, right? But it turns out you can also splice strings together, and you can concatenate them by using the plus operator. So the plus operator has two meanings. It's addition if you're working with numbers, and it concatenates strings if you use it when in text. So it'll take this text and then add it to the text that represents the value for the spinners, and then you add that to this text, and then you add that to this value, and then you add that to this text. So we're substituting in the variables in the places where we'd want to show those values. Let's go ahead and add that to the code in Visual Studio. And I've got much of this in a notepad file, so I'm just going to copy and paste it. Okay. Go down to my analyze form function, and I'm going to paste that. And then you'll see what this looks like. So this is the form element that has the ID of spinners, and I can change it to be any number I want. This is the form element that has the ID of cost, so I can also change this to a numeric value. When I click the Submit button, it calls the Analyze Form function, and it fetches this element and the value in it and puts it there, and this element and the value in it and puts it there. So in the last step, we're going to learn how to do math on those variables so that we can report out the total cost. This may be the easiest part. If a variable is a numeric type, you can perform math operations and expressions that use that variable and just substitute the variable in instead of numbers. The most common math operators are, of course, your plus, minus, this asterisk means multiply, and the / means divide. Those are all common math operators. And so to finish off this program, we're just going to add these two lines of code. We'll make a new variable called total cost, and that equals the variable that stores our cost times the variable that has the number of spinners. And then we'll pop up one more alert that tells us the total cost. So I'm going to copy and paste those lines of code just to make it a little faster. And we'll go back over to Visual Studio. Okay, if I run this, I'm going to enter in a number of fidget spinners, and I'll enter in a cost for the fidget spinners. And when I click Submit, it shows my original message. You wanted 9 spinners that cost $5.50 each. And when I dismiss that alert box, it shows me the total cost using the math that I already specified. Okay, so your assignment. Use your existing web page with 2 or more form elements that take numeric input. And those form elements should do a math calculation that you choose what it is. You could find the area of a rectangle, find the area of a circle, find the volume of a cylinder, calculate the hypotenuse of a right triangle if you know the 2 legs. You decide. And you'll write a JavaScript function to get those values from the form elements, do the math required, and show you the output with an alert message box. Make sure you've linked the function to your button with the onClick attribute, test your code, and update your Google site. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing you in Lesson 6.